All right, welcome to this episode of The Evolving Activist. I'm Lauren Morn. I'm a Gestalt coach, and my mission in life is to support the people creating positive and compassionate change in the world. And I wanted to make an episode today just to talk a little bit about why I'm doing this podcast. I did make some notes, so I might refer to them from time to time. But basically, look, as long as I could remember, I've been concerned about fairness and justice. I always used to say it's because I'm a Libran, right? Justice is part of who I am. But let me give you a little bit of a background, right? First of all, my makeup. I've always wanted harmony and peace for people and just for the whole world, right? For the whole world. That old Coke song, I'd like to build the world a home and furnish it with love, that sort of thing. I was that kid. And I grew up in a slightly different environment from most of the people around me. I grew up in a fairly conservative family environment in a very colonialist society. I was born in Rhodesia, grew up in Zimbabwe, and lived through that civil war and have felt my understanding of my worldview around that experience shift as I've grown older and as I've gotten more educated and understood more about kind of the roots of colonialism and really what was going on. So anyway, so that was my upbringing. Very much kind of almost a British sort of upbringing. I internalized the belief system that, it was improper to rock the boat or to make a fuss about things, right? So brought up, to be seen and not heard, to be a good girl. And, with my desire to keep the peace and to create harmony, what that really looked like for most of my life was just me shutting up and not having the opinions that I really did have or not expressing them. So anyway, in my second year of university, I went to university in Sydney, Australia, Macquarie University, go Macquarie. And a boyfriend took me on a date to a protest march. That was a memorial protest, basically remembering the 1989 massacre of students and intellectuals in Tiananmen Square, China, as they protested for democracy. And I still get goosebumps when I think about that experience, like being sitting vigil in the outside town hall in Sydney, and that was my first taste of activism, right? Of people standing up for the rights of others. And, later on, I was in the corporate world and I witnessed the strike, I think it was the dock workers' strikes, some of the big strikes. Australia's always been a fairly highly unionized country in my experience. And these dock workers' strikes dragged on for weeks and weeks and weeks. Excuse me. And they actually got quite violent at one point. And I remember thinking how irresponsible the protesters were being. And, it was only later on when I was doing my postgrad work and I was studying industrial relations and I was having to mock argue cases in front of the Industrial Relations Commission that I really kind of had this complete change of heart. I started to better understand the roots of the union movement and, why and how and all the dynamics of what go into people fighting for workers' rights. And so my worldview shifted quite substantially in that point. I think it was probably about then that my dad started referring to me as the pinko commie in the family. But hey, I'll take it. Excuse me. Also, I've always loved animals, always, and didn't really do much about that. Grew up in a very heavy meat-eating family, very, very traditional in terms of the meat and three veg type of approach to life. And but I always wanted to speak for them in some way. I volunteered for a wildlife hotline when I was in university. And as a result of that, I started to really kind of think about how we could better and more humanely coexist with the animals on the planet. Once I moved to the US, there's a great volunteering culture here in the US. People do a lot of volunteering. And so I got more involved in causes and supporting animal rescues and shelters and things like that. In fact, I met my mayor, Gift, you can see her behind me on the poster. I met her at a rescue when I was volunteering, and she and I got to know each other over a few years, and eventually I fostered her, and then she adopted me. So, luckily for me, right, that she had been rescued from a pretty terrible situation. Luckily for me, she was an incredibly resilient and resourceful mare, and she has taught me so much over the years that we've been together. I also experienced some things in my own family with my cats that shifted my worldview around animals as well, and around healing and around making change in the world. And as a result of some fairly dramatic losses and reactions of the pets that were left, I started to move out of my conservative mindset around what is possible and what's not possible, and embrace the idea of things like animal communication, embrace the notion of energy healing and flower essences and Reiki. And I know that that's pretty woo for a lot of you, but it changed my life. It really did. And it really kind of opened my mind up to the fact that our non-human brethren are every bit as unique and individual as our human brethren or sisterin, or whatever we call them, right? So the other beings on the planet, just because we don't speak their language and just because their language is not verbal, doesn't mean that they're not communicating with each other and with us all the time. So anyway, that was part of my awakening, really. And eventually I kind of started to reconcile. It took me a while, but I started to reconcile my values with my lifestyle. And initially went vegetarian, and then after learning some more, went vegan, and that was about 12 years ago. And honestly, I haven't looked back yet. I actually wish that I had that awakening earlier in my life. I wish that I had come to that awareness sooner. So pretty much my only regret about going vegan. And from there, as I educated myself and as I became more aware of things, I realized that I couldn't possibly sit on the sidelines any longer while so many animals are being abused every year for human consumption or entertainment or fashion, right? So my voice and my values were getting stronger, but I still had a lot of baggage, I guess. There was still a lot of limiting beliefs that were stopping me, that I was allowing to stop me from being a voice and really kind of being a more active ally to the non-humans on our planet, being a more active example of change. So part of that was me doing my personal work, right? Part of that was me looking at what does it take to be the change I want to see? Looking at my values. What values are mine, truly mine, and what are values that I've kind of inherited from the systems I grew up in and that I've just never questioned? Belief systems, values, right? I had to resolve my guilt. I had a lot of guilt about realizing just how complicit I had been my whole life in these systems of exploitation and oppression, not just to non-humans, but to other humans as well. So, that's a pretty heavy emotion to process, guilt, right? And I think a lot of us have it, whether we acknowledge it or not. Obviously, being more active in the social justice world, I regularly have to process the darker emotions, the deeper, the kind of the heavier emotions, and keep very mindful and examine my mindset on a regular basis, both to consider what my beliefs are. I'm always examining my belief systems, and the assumptions that I make and the perceptions I have, but also to really kind of consciously choose mindsets that keep me emotionally and mentally healthy. So obviously more, I mean, no shortage of baggage here, right? With people, human beings, we're good at it. We carry a bunch of it around with us. But back to why this podcast, right? The evolving activist. Well, I want to have a conversation about making positive change in the world. For those of us who are still trying to figure out what that looks like for us, right? I call us activists, even though some of us might not resonate with that word. We're people who see how much better the world can be if we were all kinder, if we were all more compassionate, more aware, if we were more respectful of all the other beings that we share the planet with, human and non-human, right? We're people who take some kind of action towards making that world a reality. Whether it's speaking up at work or in the community, calling our representatives in government, signing petitions, protesting, street outreach, having conversations with friends and family, even just working on consistently modeling and living our values, right? Being kind, having respect for others, showing compassion to ourselves and to others, right? Pursuing justice and equality. We're everyday people, but we still want to dismantle the oppressive, exploitative, and supremacist systems that a lot of us have grown up in. We want to eliminate the isms, right? The prejudices and discriminations and injustices that and abuses that are the outcome of believing that some lives matter less than others. And we're still figuring out how to do that, right? Which means that we'll struggle with all sorts of things. The discomfort and excitement of becoming aware of things that we used to be comfortably oblivious to. Getting out of our comfort zone when it comes to speaking up or being an ally or taking action, right? As a bystander, as a member of a marginalized community, as an ally, right? Getting clear about our values and belief systems and what choices we make in our lives as a result of those. We'll struggle with finding our voice. We'll struggle with speaking our truth, with not feeling like we have a right to or that we're qualified to take a stand on the issues that we care about. We'll struggle with that. Worrying about offending or upsetting people, or being laughed at, attacked, excluded, misunderstood. Right? Choosing a path to make change in the world can be lonely, but we'll also find community, right? We'll be judged both by the people that we're trying to influence and by people we think are allies in the activist movements and communities. So we'll always be judged for simultaneously being too much and not enough of whatever we're standing for. And again, along the way, we'll find our voice. We'll get clear on our values. We'll ditch our limiting beliefs and embrace that growth mindset, right? We'll start to think for ourselves. We'll start to speak up on what's really important to us. We'll stop concerning ourselves with what other people think and stand unapologetically instead for our truth, whether we use the approved vocabulary or not, right? We'll become what one of my mentors calls getting good at having sweaty palmed conversations, because we call it conflict. Really, it's just an invitation to connect and to co-create something better. We'll get good at that. We'll welcome those conversations. We'll lean in and learn from each other, right? We'll realize this is an evolution. We're not standing still on some continuum. And we'll accept with self-compassion where we are in our process. We'll work on ourselves as a first port of call on this journey to this kinder, more compassionate, more just world that we're trying to build. All right. We'll build resilience. We'll learn skills. We'll plant seeds. We'll create community. Sometimes we'll even lose community, but then we'll find more like-minded community to hold us up. Look, I'm not some super activist, right? With all the right words and the woke attitudes and the knowledge of every aspect of intersectional social justice. I'm not that, right? I don't have millions or even thousands of followers waiting for my expert activist tips, right? In fact, I'm not an expert on activism or any of the isms that I'm trying to stop, right? There are so many people out there that fit the bill that I can learn from and that I look to for information and growth. But I am an activist. I'm one of the millions of people around the world doing what I can to make change. Sometimes that looks small and quiet. Sometimes that looks big and dramatic, depending on what I'm capable of in the moment. I'm like you. I'm evolving on my path and I'm doing my best. Just like you. You're evolving on your path and you're doing your best. And I want to support you. I want to support your path to the activism that's right for you. So I consider this podcast actually part of my activism, supporting activists. So I hope you'll join me on the journey. Please subscribe to this podcast and share it. And if I'm adding value, feel free to rate it and review it and let people know. Because that's why I'm doing this. That's what I'm here for. So here's to our evolution as activists. Here's to the change we're going to make in the world. Here's to the growth that we're going to experience. And I look forward to growing with you. Have a wonderful day wherever you are in the world, and I'll catch you on the flip side.